right, hey guys, thanks for coming. I'm CCP Rise, and I know it's the last day. You guys are probably all a little exhausted. I know I am. Hopefully, can make it worth it for you. I have a little surprise at the end, and I want to abuse having a crowd here for 1 second first, if that's okay. Raise your hand if you think the Sisters Cruiser is OP. Too strong? No? All right. That seems about right. You don't think I should change it? Okay, maybe I won't. All right, so I wanted to do kind of a silly on-theme presentation for being here in Las Vegas. So I'm going to talk about poker and about EVE Online PvP, and I'll explain why in a second. So to start, tell you a little about myself. I'm kind of your average in-sync loving, hula hooping BMXer who, before working at CCP, was also a pro poker player. And first of all, if you don't believe me, I think that's good. Most people who say that they're good at poker or that they're pro or that they are rich from it or have a friend who is rich from it, they're either exaggerating or lying, and so if you don't believe me, I completely respect that. Kind of typical Q&A when people find out, I guess a couple little fun facts, like, yes, you can make money, but it's really hard. I've lost like $11,000 in a day is like the max. And I've never been on TV or any tournaments or anything. Most people who are actual pro poker players, it's very unglamorous and it's difficult. And that's why I'm pretty happy to be here now rather than doing that. So me as a EVE player, most of you probably know most about this. I had a character named Kill2. I've been playing since about 2006 and a half. And I did a lot of solo and small game PvP. Most fun part of the game for me by far, and I made a lot of content around that, videos, a podcast, and some other things along with the Alliance tournament. So that's sort of where that background is. And then when it comes to me as a developer, for some reason CCP hired the three of us. It's really still sort of confusing, and I'm still kind of catching my feet. I thought doing a presentation on development would be, I don't know, fair, but also I want to spend a little more time, before I feel like I can start preaching about development. I'm learning a lot and hopefully not wrecking the game, but in the meantime, so why talk about EVE and poker together? I think that they have an enormous amount in common. They're both really focused on behavioral psychology. I think understanding people is really important to being successful at both. They're both hugely helped by spreadsheets, as I'll show throughout. They are both about consequences, which is really important. I think both of them rely hugely on having, what happens in the game actually matters. I think games where losing hurts are just in a completely different sort of space than games where that isn't the case. And it's certainly the case for both EVE and for poker. So I think that makes it a pretty relevant comparison. So for the presentation, I'm going to cover 4 kind of basic ideas and try to just get a really quick view of how they compare. So this is sort of the list. I'll go through it. It's not comprehensive. I'm not going to teach you how to play poker at a basic, at a how does a hand actually work level, but most people probably at least have some sense for that. And same for EVE. I'm just kind of going to hit these ideas and see if I can shed some light and kind of compare them. So for the first one, on the poker side, starting hands is one of the most important things for new players in poker. This is a comparison of the odds of aces beating 7-3. Aces are an 86% favorite. That's really, really important, and one of the things most people get wrong when they start playing poker is they just play too many hands. So you can do a huge service to yourself by just playing less. And actually, it would be ideal to only play 1 aces because it's the best. But because of blinds, you can't do that. You're forced to put in money every so often, which means you're just trying to make sure that you're playing enough hands that you're not losing money to blinds, but you're playing few enough that they are on average better than your opponents. Spreadsheets, again, you can go look into some if you want, but I'm not going to go through that now. There's some basic trends, though. Pairs are really good. Big cards are better than small cards. Cards that are suited are better, and cards that are close to each other are better. If you just sort of follow that, and aim for playing around as many hands as there are people in the game. So play a hand each round, more or less. So in a normal full-handed 9 or 10-handed game, playing a hand every 9 or 10 hands, on average, is going to be about where you want to be before you know a lot about what you're doing. So, and these are all bad hands. Just because they're suited connected doesn't mean they're good. Just because they're suited and kind of big doesn't mean they're good. Or just because they're kind of big doesn't mean they're good. Better to play less. So if we move that idea kind of over to Eve and talk about starting situation in Eve, I mean, most people know this, that your fit you bring to the fight is one of the most important indicators of how successful you'll be. And something I find very interesting, and it makes sense, but something that's really consistent across Eve and people I've played with, is that they really want to be creative. They really want to, as soon as they start PvPing, even if it's by themselves, they want to make everything up from scratch. And just like in poker and pretty much any other game out there, people have put a lot of work into figuring out what works. And so in Eve, I think the best thing you can do is steal. Find people who are good, which, there's plenty of ways to try and evaluate that, but watch videos, crawl kill boards, talk to people, find out what people you think you can trust, and then copy what they're doing. There's data all over about what people are flying. There's lost mails for pretty much everybody, and mimicking those is a really good place to start. And something I notice is that people often feel like if they're doing this, they're kind of losing out on game experience, that they're missing out on an option to put their personal preferences or their style into the game. And I really don't think that's the case. You mimic people to start, and then you make changes based on experience. And usually that will lead you in a really good direction. I often, when I'm picking up a new ship, just go find somebody else good who's flown it, start with where they're at instead of starting from scratch, and then make changes as I go. And usually that makes me feel ownership over the experience without costing me, probably 10s or 20 of engagements where I'm missing out on potential efficiency just because I chose to ignore what other people have done. So I think that's pretty important. Just like in poker, there's some things that, some trends that are common though in fits you're picking and in chips you want to use that are good, just like big cards and pairs are good. In Eve, damage is really good at small scales. I think it's really hard to do anything without ships that do more than average damage. Speed is really good. More and more as people get better at Eve and get smarter. Controlling engagements, mitigating damage with mobility rather than with tank has become sort of the dominant style, and so that means ships that are faster tend to be much better. And of course, tackling is really important on pretty much everything you fly, and I put drakes because they're the best tacklers. All right, next part's a little more complicated, but I'm going to start with the poker side again. This is basically about the idea of efficiency and understanding the relationship between what you invest and what you get back. So these are the two ideas we need to pay attention to for both games, but I'll start with poker, but understanding your chance of winning is really important, and then being able to compare that to what you get when you do win is really important. And it can actually be really difficult to figure those two things out depending on the situation. So in poker, again, spreadsheets, if we're talking about chance of winning, there's tons of things that go into it. The most basic version of it is counting outs, which is just understanding which cards could come off the deck to help you win, and then comparing that to the total amount of cards in the deck. That sounds sort of straightforward, and if you just use these out charts, you can figure out what the chances are, but that all depends on knowing that you'll win if you get the card, which depends on understanding what your opponents might have. It gets very complicated very quickly. So I would just say that this is good to know and work on, but this is where most poker players spend their careers trying to gain ground and understanding what their chance of winning is actually going to be. So I can't do much better than that for you on that. But on the other side of poker, things are very easy, which is what you get when you win. You can always see the pot. You can always count bets as they go in, which means you always know what you get when you do win. And so you can always have some feel of understanding that when the pot is big, it's better for you to put money in. So as an example, the slide is set up in sort of a weird way, but basically, if we take a really simple situation of knowing our chances to win, which is a coin flip, so we know we're 50-50, and then we look at how big a pot is, say it's $4, we know we have to invest $1 to get a chance to win, we can figure out how much we make over time. And in this case, betting $1 to get a chance at winning $4 on a coin flip earns you $10 on average after 10 flips. That's basically all of poker in a way. The hard part is understanding the coin flip. So that means if we compare it to another situation, this one's actually set up dumb too, but if you invest $4, and on this slide it says if you win 3, but even if you were going to win 6, it becomes a bad investment because after time, you're investing too much for the chance to win too little. And that's basically kind of the whole thing for poker, is understanding that equation. So again, the takeaway is take more chances when there's more to win. It sounds really simple, but it's actually pretty tough, and it can be really counterintuitive. Something I always thought when I started playing poker was, if lots of people were in the pot, I should probably not be, because the chances of me winning will be lower because there's so many people, so you have to have a really good hand. That's actually backwards. When there's lots of people in the hand, it means that the pot is gigantic, which means you can afford to take a ton of risk and play crappier stuff and bet on longer chances. So that's pretty actually simple takeaway from it. So on the Eve side, things flip. The pot is impossible to understand. You never know when you undock and go out to fight, or at least usually, you can get really good intel, and that helps with that. But for the most part, you can't tell people, go fly this ship because it makes it easier for me to be efficient. You have to just deal with what people are flying. And on a single occasion, especially when you're solo or in a really small group and you don't have an intel network or you don't have particular opponents you're expecting to find, it's very hard to know what you'll run into. So that means on the pot side, if we compare to poker, we don't really know where we're going to be at. So that means we have to control the risk side. So in Eve, the bet is what you're flying, and that includes, of course, your implants and your ship and rigs and whatever you invest into the ship. We have an enormous amount of control over this. This is an awesome, really old screenshot of ship icons, but you can fly whatever you want, and that means that efficiency is actually really easy to control. So, in this example, I could choose to fly a Thrasher with a grand total, loss amount of about 17 mil, or I could solo win a Loki, which will cost me $1 billion each time I fly it, and those produce different efficiencies, but they don't have a huge influence on, or they don't depend on what other people fly so much. So that just means if you're trying to be efficient as a solo or a small ganger, stick to stuff that's cheap, and usually efficiency will be pretty easy to find. So the next idea is variance. This is a completely ridiculous picture of dogs. But the idea is a simple mathematical idea, I guess, just that when there's chances, you're going to have varying outcomes. And it's important to take that into consideration. So you're going to have kind of deviation from your expected results in both of these games, and you have to figure out how to deal with that. So this is a chart of a pro poker player, his efficiency, if you will, his earned money over time. And this is something that actually I think is one of the hardest things for people to deal with in poker, even after they're seasoned pros who've been playing for a long time, because chances are crazy and you can get weird runs. The box there that I've highlighted is part of a really big general upward curve where his expected income is really high. He's making a lot of money over time in general, but that period could easily be 6 months, and the part that I've highlighted could easily be 3 weeks. And during that 3 weeks, he's lost a lot of money. He's lost all the money he's made over the last 4 weeks. And that can be really depressing, and it very often causes people to kind of fall into spirals of doubt and frustration that lead to them actually turning their curve, their overall win rate over time, down and losing money in the long run. And that's one of the biggest things to conquer as a pro. Of course, the other side of this, if I flip this chart over, is that as a bad player who's losing over time, it's completely realistic to have a huge uptick. I mean, the box I've highlighted here, if this was his chart over time as a losing player, he might have made, $15,000 in a month, even though he's a losing player and the graph over time will go down. And that's really important to understand, because it means that when you're new or bad or entering a new environment where you're not sure what your win rate is, your results are not necessarily a good indication in the short term of how good of a player you are. And basically, people make that mistake a lot, which is why poker exists. I mean, people get short-term results that make them happy, and then they use that to justify bad results in the long term. And that's also very important to understand. It means that even if you're winning, you have to be hypercritical of how you're playing, constantly trying to learn and improve. Otherwise, you might end up in trouble very shortly. So again, we can move this idea to Eve. This is actually a is destroyed graph for Kill 2 for a month about a year ago. And you can see that it includes my losses. So it's a graph where at each kill mail, whether it's a kill where I destroy disk or a loss mail where I lost disk, is put onto this graph, and you can get an idea of how it looks. And this is, just like in poker, extremely important to understand the kind of effect variance can have on your psychology. The box I've highlighted here, is like 8 or 9 kill mails, 10 kill mails in a row, where I've gotten crushed, and I've lost enough to make up for how much I'd killed over the several weeks before that probably, and that can be really, really frustrating. And it can often make people think that they don't know what they're doing or that their fits are bad or that their ship is bad. I mean, you could contextualize these results by any of those variables, an area you're in, a ship you're using, a person you're flying with. And over time, or in the short term, that can cause you to feel very differently than the reality. So if the reality of this graph is that I'm actually doing pretty well, short-term variance can convince me otherwise. As an example of that, a very common set of engagements for me throughout my career would look like this. I pick a ship, I go out, I jump into a camp and die. Of course, there's ways around that, but the reality is that a lot of the time you die and there's very little you could have done to control it. And so then maybe I go a second one and I do something dumb and I die. That counts too. And I go again and there's a falcon. And by this point, prom would probably quit. And I don't know if you guys know who prom is, but it's a good joke. But then, eventually something good happens and your graph levels out. And it's not that necessarily the isolated events are reflections of how smart I am or how good I am at the game. It's just that Eve, like poker, has a lot of chance in it. I mean, that's one of the great things about it is that we can't predict exactly what will happen when we undock. And emergence leads to variance. And you have to be able to deal with that so that you don't get depressed about losing several ships in a row, even over pretty long periods of time. Water. So yeah, the moral of the story for Eve is definitely just keep trying. You'll both get better, and you'll also eventually overcome the variance that just is inherent to the way Eve works. The last idea is relatively straightforward. It's just that being aggressive is really good. This is almost always the case in competitive games, I feel like. You're just better off being an aggressor. The reasons vary, but it's usually the case that this is true. In poker, it's really easy to explain, or at least part of it is. There's two ways to win in poker. One is to get to the end of the hand and compare your hand to everyone else's and see who has the best one. The other one is everyone folds, which means if you're not aggressive, you're completely missing out on one of the chances you have to win. And that chance represents a huge part of the potential value in participating in poker. So being aggressive just simply pays off at a really basic level by giving you the opportunity to have everybody else fold. And the other part of it for poker, which is the part that transfers to Eve better, is that making people make difficult decisions is good. If you're passive, they feel comfortable and they have a lot of control over how things work, and that just makes things much easier for them. So by being aggressive, you just make them work harder to figure out what they ought to be doing. And that means they'll make mistakes. And if we push that into Eve, that first idea is true, that being aggressive means they're more likely to make mistakes. Another really important one for Eve, and one that I think a lot of players I've played with don't sort of take into account well enough, is that opportunities in Eve are extremely short-term. Good chances to get kills in Eve are often based on very tight time frames that evaporate quickly. That happens in the form of people realizing that they're in trouble and leaving. It happens in the form of fights deteriorating as friends are able to get to where the engagement is and help. Even things as much like how long it takes someone to warp to where you are make a huge, huge difference. So trending towards aggression in my career, I think, has helped a ton because it means that I get to take advantage of these tiny windows that evaporate pretty quickly. And that basically amounts to being aggressive. A small caveat that I would include for both games is that aggressive doesn't necessarily mean reckless. People in both games often get caught up in aggression. It can be very fun. But things like just, haha, I'm going to jump into a gape camp because I'm being aggressive and that's better is obviously not going to pay off in the long run. So you have to be a little careful. So just to kind of seal things up neatly here, steal fits from good players, cut costs in Eve when you can, you'll be more efficient. Losing doesn't necessarily mean you're bad, it could just be variance. Being aggressive is better. For poker, play less hands, you'll have just a better mathematical chance of making money. Take more chances when the pot is big rather than when the pot is small. Just because you're winning doesn't mean you're good, and you probably will lose soon, so be careful. And be aggressive. So that's pretty much it. Hope that's at least kind of interesting. If you guys want to talk more about poker or about Eve, feel free to talk to me anytime. And before I completely shut down, I have kind of a fun question, another one for myself. Raise your hand if you've lost more than $300 this trip playing gambling. Raise your hand if you lost more than 500. 700. Which one of you two lost more? 550? All right, you, to help out with your variance, I've got CCP Tallest, who used to be a dev, just recently left, played in the World Series of Poker. He got sent by CCP. When he was in the World Series, he wore this dev shirt, and there's an article about his trip to the World Series of Poker in the Young magazine, and he wanted me to make sure that they found somebody here, so I thought maybe the biggest loser at Vegas would be a good person for it. So there you go. So thanks a lot, guys. If anybody wants to do questions, I can do that. If you guys just want to go party, we can do that too. So. Party it is, I guess.
All right, Bajan Bali with Monkeys with Guns. You were talking about being aggressive. I don't PvP in nullsec a lot. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts about being aggressive in low sec? Maybe not whenever the opponent is not pirate or suspect. What do you think about being aggressive then and having to take gay guns?
I mean, I think it can be really great. It depends on what you're interested in. I think part of the trick with Eve is evaluating or figuring out what you're looking to gain. And I always found myself kind of pushed away from pirating because usually it isn't as difficult. It's like, well, that's not the right word. It's like, it's more of about getting kills and like having efficiency than having challenging situations. From my like outside, I haven't actually done a lot of it, but I always felt like I could take gate guns to get an easy kill, basically. It's rarer that I was in situations where I felt like I could engage like a difficult, a situation that would be interesting to try to figure out as a pirate, and so I generally steered away from it. I don't think that's always the case. Obviously, pirates have a lot of interesting engagements. A lot of them were me trying to kill them, but I guess it just depends on what you're after, is what I'm saying.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm saying in more like one-on-one situations, or do you think it would be better to put yourself kind of, if you are a pirate, in an awkward position to maybe make yourself look vulnerable or something?
I think usually, I've always had better luck getting good engagements out of looking vulnerable. I've always rather fly a Ferox and when I jump into a gate, pretend to want to warp away in a line and get engaged that way rather than just attacking the first thing I see. That's not always the case, but I find that being the initiator, I guess I think of aggression and initiation as different, and I think of being the initiator as actually being much harder. It works a lot better when you have groups. How? I have stuff to give away. You guys are willing to take it? That's great. All right. The problem, I had to do it without telling you I was going to give you stuff, or people would just be like, I lost $100,000. I'll do.
So one of the things about poker is that all of the odds are completely mathematically proven. It's just simple to figure everything out. In Eve, there are some open source tools like EFT, PIFA, et cetera, that have kind of reversed engineered how all of the bonuses and penalties and everything stack up.
Yeah.
As a programmer, I've been interested in writing something that other MMOs have where they optimize your layout, build out or whatever. Yeah. Is there any chance of getting some more information in the database exports to be able to kind of write that without having to write tons of special code for every single ship and module?
Well, I'll ask you another question in just a second, so stay there for 1 minute. But my first reaction to that question is that, first of all, the math part of poker, in the sense that you can compare hands to one another on paper, is very simple and worked out.
Right.
But understanding the odds of what's going to happen in the game is very difficult. I mean, you can never know what other people are going to do exactly, and that makes it very difficult to quantify the odds of, like I said, the chance of winning based on other people's behavior is really complicated. In Eve, I would say that it's even more the case that it's very difficult to figure out how you would quantify quality. So if you're talking about being able to evaluate a ship or a mod on like some kind of pure power measurement, I think
the idea would be to have different scales of, what type of range of engagement do you want to have?
Yeah.
What type of damage are you looking to prefer? That type of stuff.
Sure.
Where you have a bunch of knobs, and then you get a build out based on those knobs.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why not. It depends on what you would want, I guess. I mean, I think there's a ton of possibilities for us to do cool stuff with Crest that we haven't done yet, and maybe the guys working on that will find new ways to give data about ships. And I mean, I don't know. I don't from a design perspective, like from a game standpoint, I don't see why having more information about the way things work wouldn't be better.
Cool. Thank you.
So. Free things. That might be good. Well, but again, I can't prove it, and why would anybody I won $100,000?
I won a poker tournament last night.
Do another question in the meantime, so I don't think about it.
It's not related to this, but in Iceland, they were introduced the director that they're going to hire to produce a movie or television series.
Yeah.
Heard anything else about that?
No, not tons. I mean, I know they're working on it, but we haven't had, since FanFest where they sort of introduced the idea, they haven't said anything more specific. We heard a little more about the comic yesterday from David, but you guys know as much as I do.
So I lost a firetail to a heron. What were the odds of that shit happening?
Probably pretty good if a guy's PvPing in a heron. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
I think.
But my actual question though for you was, when you play poker, do you drink or complete sober to keep a straight mind?
I actually never drank until I moved to Iceland, and then I immediately became an alcoholic. So, I was pretty straight edge as a poker player, but now that I have a normal job, I can